Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast. It's great to see you here again. And as ever, I have a fantastic guest for you tonight. Welcome, Richard Stone.
Good evening, Jane. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And it's so great to have you here. Now, Richard and I actually had a fantastic conversation on a boat fairly recently because we were at this event called World Game Changers, weren't we? Really
We were.
exciting event, yeah, which is all about kind of making a difference in the world and fundraising and giving back. And it was at a really, really lovely place in London. And so we had a very interesting conversation. And I said to him, I've got to get you on the podcast because you have so much value to give to our guests. And so I just can't wait to share it and share you and so on. So let's get into the introduction. So you are a chartered construction expert, a public speaker, coach, and a non-executive director. And Rich has been in construction for over 40 years, and he has over £400 million worth of projects under his belt and over 50,000 property refurbishments. I couldn't believe it when he told me that statistic, but it's true, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, so one of the roles that I've had is delivering big social housing refurbishment projects. And for a period of years, we were going through 500 front doors a week. So
Wow.
every week we would refurbish 500 properties. So to put
Wow.
some sort of context around that, that's a
Mm.
complete new heating system, a complete rewire, complete new kitchen, complete new bathrooms, en suites, new floorings, redecoration, and in some cases PV installations on roofs and external. So yeah, it was a military level kind of organisation at that level to deliver that sort of volume of refurbishment.
Oh, I can imagine. I can imagine. That's kind of enormous. So today, Richard, you use your knowledge to help people avoid all the common profit destroying and sometimes business destroying and even liberty and life destroying pitfalls of property, as you can end up in prison purely through ignorance in this sector. So we're going to talk a lot about risk tonight because it's not a very sexy subject when you're selling property courses, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's not, and I mean, a lot of the training courses are very sort of short in duration. I mean, apart from telling myself that like how I feel about myself every day, the second thing I tell myself every morning in my affirmations is that I know nothing and every day is a school day, because mindset is absolutely everything. And literally, construction is such a dynamic and complex environment. You can learn stuff every single day. And, I've been in the industry over 40 years now. I'm still learning stuff every day. So if somebody's literally been on a 3 or 4 or 5 day training course, and then the next thing they want to go and do a commercial conversion, or they want to go and have a crack at delivering a new build property, go and do a title split, buy a plot of land and go and build a house, that's great. But you actually need to understand that you're not in the property industry, you're in the construction industry, and that's got its own specific set of rules and laws. And people don't understand that because they don't get taught that. And that's the thing that can land them in serious hot water, can land them in prison, but most importantly, is putting people's lives in danger because they don't know how to set the stuff up safely.
Yes, well, that's a very, very important point. Safety first and foremost, right? I mean, people's lives, people's health, that matters more than anything, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, we have a firm belief that everybody that goes onto site every day has a fundamental right to go home. And I mean, literally just this week, somebody's
Yes.
instructed me to do some professional representation on a project that they've got a problem with, a really challenging builder. And they've got sewage coming back into properties because the drains have been installed wrong, because nobody supervised the work was being done to the drawings and it was being done properly because they wanted to cut corners and save costs. That's affecting people's life. Buying
Well,
a
it
house is a huge decision for people.
Well, it is. And funnily enough, when my daughter was living in student accommodation in Leeds, she had this house and it looked very nice from the outside. It looked very nice from the inside, but she had that exact same problem. In the basement, all of the sewage was coming up into the shower. and the landlord didn't even fix it. They just basically said, "Well, shut the door. It's not our problem," which is just like, you know, I mean, you can get very serious diseases, can't you?
You
You know,
certainly can from sewage.
yes,
And this
absolutely.
is what people don't get. I mean, we've done overfit in one of our businesses that does property repairs and maintenance. Sorry. We've done over 50 projects where people have had issues with commercial conversions, where existing offices are converted into flats. Nobody thinks about upsizing all of the drainage. So all of a sudden, a building that might have had 100 staff and 5 toilets has now got 50 apartments in it with 50 bathrooms. But the main soil stacks are no bigger. And what happens is that they get overwhelmed,
Mhm.
and people are stood in the shower one day, and the next thing, it's not clear water that they're stood in anymore. It's changed colour slightly. So, yeah, this sort of stuff happens because people don't invest the money in getting the design done properly.
Well, that's right, and the thing is, they're obviously the checks are not good enough, are they, if this type of stuff, happens? So let's talk about where things go wrong because, this is not meant to scare anybody, right? That's not the purpose of this podcast. What we're doing is we're actually bringing awareness of things that can go wrong so that you can get them right. I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't, it isn't difficult. It's easier to do it right than it is to do it wrong. But it's a bit like, I'm a rubbish cook, so I don't pretend that I'm an amazing chef and market myself as a chef. I'm not a mechanic. I wouldn't try and service my own car. But so many people sort of will go and spend £1,000 or £2,000 on some sort of property training course and then believe that they're a master constructor and they've got all this experience to go and deliver a project properly. And they'll dispense with the professional services of contract administrators and a proper design team. Well, these people have accreditations and have years of training and decades of experience for a reason, because that's the experience you need in order to be able to design this stuff properly in the first instance, deliver it on site properly, and deliver it to the right quality standard, so that actually when you get to the point you're handing the project over and the property and effectively the product, it's built properly and it's built safely. If you go and buy a Hoover
Mhm.
from Amazon, it's built to all sorts of electrical standards and it's got kite marks and CE marks. It's built in a controlled environment. Construction sites are not that controlled, and yet people seem to not see the value in having the quality checks done at the intermediary points during the delivery to ensure that the product at the end is actually fit for purpose.
Yeah, yeah, a very, very important point. And I think sometimes what happens, because we all know that it's very difficult to get a deal over the line here in the UK because land is at a premium. And so, as I've seen this myself, that would-be developers come in, they'll do a course, they'll be itching to find a project. Maybe they've got a bit of cash from somewhere or whatever, and they just can't wait to put all that experience to work. And so a project that a more experienced developer and a major constructor, main contractor would put their heads together and say, does this work? And they probably reject it because it wouldn't, because they know what it takes to do it properly. It will be taken by somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing because they don't really understand. Well, let's just say they don't realize or appreciate the importance of those services that you were talking about. So they cut corners, and that's when things tend to go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, in the private sector, that's certainly where things go wrong.
Yeah,
Is primarily generally because people don't understand the complexity and what goes into actually constructing buildings. I'm
yeah.
involved in sorting out a claim at the moment on a block in London of just short of 300 apartments that have been an office block's been converted into 300 apartments, and all of the air conditioning has been designed wrong. All of the electrical installation has been designed wrong, so that they can't recharge the communal services,
Wow.
which means that effectively the landlord is paying for all of the electrical supply for 288 apartments, including 220 which have been sold.
Really?
Yeah, because they can't legally recharge the electrics, because the way it's been installed, it can't be split out. So under the
Right.
Landlord and Tenant Act, you can only charge for utilities that have actually been used. Well,
Hmm.
they can't demonstrate that each apartment is used X amount of that utility cost, so therefore they can't recover the cost. So the freeholder or the developer who built the scheme is now in a situation where the electric bill was 250 grand a month for the building before the utility price hike, and that's how much they were having to swallow. Now it's 500k a month
Ah,
for
really?
electricity, yeah. And literally, we're dealing
500,000 a month?
we're dealing with the administrator because the developer's gone bust because they've run out of money to pay the facility. So the bank have seized the building and appointed an administrator. So all of a sudden, the investor now, so the bank are not going to get the money back because you've got a building that's not been built properly. The bank aren't going to get all of their money back. The equity stake that the developer put in is lost.
Yeah.
Well, that's not their own money. They've borrowed that money from other investors on some form of second charge mezzanine finance.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, and this is like millions and tens of millions of pounds. It's not someone doing a little BRR for sort of flip for 40, 50 grand. It's huge sums of money. And yet
Yes.
again, because somebody wanted to cut corners and not get the design done properly.
Very, very, very tragic situation, with a lot of people affected by that, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know how many people are going to be experiencing the fallout from that, but what about the people that actually live in those apartments? I mean, or own those apartments?
Oh, it's absolute carnage. It's an
Yeah.
absolute nightmare. And I mean, I've had meetings with MPs over this.
Mm,
It's got that big. It's been mentioned in the House of Commons.
really?
It's that huge issue. It's absolutely massive. And this kind of thing happens, but property can be a really rewarding industry, and there's
Yes.
enough money in deals to do it properly, and yet people seem to not want to pay for those professional services and see it as a way of creating more profit by saying, well, we'll do it ourselves. That's great, but do you really understand what the building regulations say? Even the
Mhm.
government don't know what their own building regulations say. That's why we've ended up with Grenfell.
Yeah,
How
which
is a
is
layperson going
terrible.
to understand that?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, let's talk about Grenfell because that was just awful, wasn't it? And so, tell us what you think about Grenfell and about that cladding disaster.
So I've just read that book called
Aha!
Show Me the Bodies, How We Let Grenfell Happen. Now, I've listened to every single podcast episode of the whole inquiry. I
Right.
know a lot of the people that are involved for different reasons. There is, I mean, Richard Millett, the QC, said that he implored everyone involved to not undertake to participate in a merry-go-round of buck passing.
Okay.
And when he did his closing speech, he said it was absolutely a travesty of justice that they'd not heeded his advice and had sought to do just that.
Okay.
Because effectively, every single person that was interviewed just said, yeah, it's their fault.
Ugh, that's
So
terrible.
you've got a government who put people into jobs with no qualifications. So the head of the building research establishment was a carpenter with no technical professional qualifications. That's the body that does the research to make sure products are correct. You
Really?
had, yeah, absolutely. You had suppliers from different countries around the world seeing England as kind of the cesspit to dump all their poor products because our building regulations weren't up to scratch. And there was ways through employing lobbying bodies that they could effectively create a greater level of insulation requirement, which meant they could sell their products into the UK,
Okay.
who lied and distorted the truth and the test evidence on their products and manipulated all the test data. So they were massively at fault. I mean, that's fraud.
Oh, it
So
is. Yeah.
so they were at fault. You had layers and layers of local government who were told about all of the issues that existed within that building and chose to do nothing about it because it didn't represent good value for money, and they didn't have the money to do it because at the point that those issues were raised, we were in the midst of all of the massive austerity cuts. You've
Right.
got Eric Pickles who didn't have a clue what was going on about anything. You had a local housing authority basically procuring a £10 million building product with no knowledge of how to procure it, who then contravened the OJEU procurement law and decided that they would split out all of the professional fees into mini packages so they didn't have to tender them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they appointed an architect to design the cladding for a tower block who'd never done any facade work. It was his first project.
Really?
Yeah, and he just went on Google and looked for what products to use.
Wow.
Yeah, they sent out a tender to a number of contractors. The contractor that they wanted to use was too expensive, so they went to the next contractor and said, basically, in a behind closed doors, completely illegal meeting, this is what you need to get down to. If you get down to this number, it's your price and it's your job. They then awarded the project to them and allowed them to manage it however they saw fit, with a team of people that were not qualified to manage a project, who lied about the experience of those people on that team, which is all public record. It's all in the podcast. And those people were then lied to by their supply chain because they wanted to try and create savings because the main contractor had screwed up and missed out a massive provisional sum in the tender.
It's just unbelievable, isn't it? Just this kind of catalogue of absolute disasters.
It's like layers and layers and layers of lies, mistruths, deliberately misleading people, fraud, misrepresentation. And everybody wants to bury the fire brigade because, I'm a massive advocate, and personally, I think their contribution to it was so negligible that, they were putting people into a burning building that was 1,000 degrees. It was like a furnace. Now, they should have learned from Lakenhill, and they didn't. But that is not the fault of the individual people that were going in that building trying to save people's lives. That's the fault. That should never have happened because that building should not have responded in the way it did. That's not the fire brigade's fault. The fire brigade shouldn't need to have a plan for a building to behave in a way that it's not designed to, because it shouldn't be behaving in that way.
Absolutely.
And that point seems to have been massively missed. And to make that point so that people that are non-technical can understand. My wife was a career police officer, and there was a really horrific police accident where a police car was in the outside lane of a motorway with blue lights going and its siren at 70 miles an hour, and an articulated lorry in front of it pulled out in front of him and killed 2 police officers. That lorry should not be in the outside lane. It's prohibited from being in the outside lane.
Yeah.
The lawyer said that the police officers should have seen it and should have braked.
What?
But the lorry had no right to be in that lane. It shouldn't have been there. It should not have made that move. So why would you risk assess for something that shouldn't be allowed to happen if everything is behaving the way that it should? It's no different. How can fire brigade be expected to plan for an eventuality that, if the building's been designed properly, shouldn't happen? They're just being scapegoated because layers and layers of government have failed, and layers of business have been lobbying and spending millions of pounds in lobbying MPs to get their products into the UK market. And one of the things that comes out is actually, when you look at all of the thermal insulation requirements in building regs, a lot of that has been driven by insulation manufacturers wanting to sell products to the UK.
Because they know
it's such a massive market.
Yes.
And they know they can make loads of money out of it.
Yeah, and of course, backhanders, we don't really like to talk that much about it, but it happens. It's endemic.
Happens all the time.
Yep.
Happens all the time. It's mentioned 3 or 4 times throughout the inquiry. There's emails saying, "Oh, if you get me this order for this cladding, which is illegal and flammable, we'll send you out for a nice meal."
And that's probably the least of it. I mean, a nice meal is probably a euphemism for, a few £100,000 and God knows what.
And this is what people don't get. And, I'm no scientist, I'm no physicist or chemist. But when you look at the chemical makeup of those materials, which is on the materials data sheet, cladding that building with that product is equivalent to strapping 20,000 kilos of petrol to the outside of the building. That's how flammable it is.
It's absolutely, I mean, it is scandalous, and I think everybody knows that it's scandalous. And for any of my listeners or viewers that are listening from abroad, because about 40% of my audience are in the US, for example, they might think, what are they actually talking about? So Grenfell was it was an absolute disaster. It was a very big, tower block. It's a bit like the projects, in the US. It's public housing, and there was a terrible fire where a lot of people were killed, and
72 people.
72 people, and it was because of this flammable cladding that was on the outside of the building, and all of the corruption, the buck passing, the lack of checks, all of this stuff that Richard's talking about, that was really underpinning that, fatal and very tragic incident, right?
Yeah, that's the biggest contributory factor. There were other contributory factors which will, I think, probably be more relevant to a wider part of your audience, which I think we ought to just touch on.
Yes.
And that was the lack of proper inspections on all of the fire doors. So one of the big issues was there was only one staircase, which meant that when the fire brigade ran their hoses up, all the fire doors were left open. But the bigger issue was that all of the flat front entrance doors failed because there was loads and loads of. They drew the line at saying it was fraudulent, but basically the guy that was doing all the risk assessments lied about his qualifications. He created loads of fake post nominals to put in his email signature to make him look like he was qualified when actually he really wasn't. He then lied about a load of inspections that were done, and it was absolutely shocking. And one of the issues that I see really, really commonly in people doing sort of smaller projects is a lack of understanding around fire doors. People think that if they go to Jewson's and buy a fire door for 60 quid, that's a door set. It's not a door set. There's no primary test evidence for that door in the door lining that's already in your property that you're fitting it to. So that is not a fire door set. That's not a compliant solution.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is obviously, apart from the safety aspects, there's the money in that, property projects are very, very expensive. If they're small developers, if they're using their own money, and I've seen this myself many, many times, things go wrong, people get wiped out. Like, there's nothing easier than just to go bankrupt over a single project. So that obviously happens a lot. The other thing that happens is, people are encouraged particularly in the property training industry to use private investment. Now, we know that private investment is very valuable. In fact, I know some extremely wealthy and successful private investors who've done very, very well. And, I've got some fantastic, happy stories of investing in other people's, development projects and so on. But equally, it often goes wrong, doesn't it?
It can. It certainly can. And, I would say on balance, I think it's probably 60-40 in favour of positive outcomes. And I get a lot of people say to me, oh, you're just the professor of doom, or you're the deal slayer because you keep telling me these deals don't stack up. Well, if they don't stack up, I'll tell you if those don't stack up. But in reality, my paradigm is a little bit twisted because we do an awful lot of professional consultancy work where people either want to set the job up properly at the beginning. More commonly, they've got a problem where a project's gone wrong. So I try really hard to make sure that my paradigm is still neutral.
Yes.
Because I think that's really important, because I don't want to portray the industry to be remarkably glamorous, but equally I don't want it to portray it to be doom and gloom either.
No.
I have literally seen people lose the shirt off their back over deals that have gone wrong, and it doesn't even have to be. I saw somebody literally lose their family home over a business that failed, over a property project where no one had died. There'd not even been an accident, but the health and safety was that bad that they got fined 150 grand.
Right.
And there wasn't even an accident. Somebody had got pissed off about dust being blown across their property, reported the project to the HSE. There'd not been an accident, but the HSE threw the book at them because they'd warned them 2 or 3 times before about a lack of control measures and about a lack of safety on site, and they threw the book at them. And the guy lost his house.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it really. It's very, very high risk. And I think as long as people understand that, and obviously with experience and with the right people, this is what I've seen with some of the developers that I've worked with, because I do a little bit of, work in that area. as you know, the more experienced people are, the more they do it right, the more they're willing to do it right, the more they're able to spend the money to get it right, and the more they set the deal up from the beginning, not to expose themselves excessively to risk, then the more likely it is, obviously, for things to go right. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating. So let's get on to some common problems, Richard, because you come in as a troubleshooter. So people come to you. Give us some examples of things that have happened.
So, okay, so we are currently looking at a project where somebody was converting a property into a HMO. The job is about 120 grand over budget, and it's not finished, and the builder's refusing to come back to site. That happened. That whole situation arose because the investor client went and appointed an architect to do some drawings. The architect said, "Okay, here's a quote. Here's a fee proposal for producing the drawings, doing the documentation, and there's a quote for the contract administration." And the guy said, and I've seen the email chain because it's quite humorous actually. Said, "Contract administration? What do you mean contract administration? Is that right in the contract?" And the guy said, "No, contract administration is actually us representing you as the employer's agent for the duration of the job." And the guy sent him an email back, said, "That's great, mate, but thank you, but I know the builder, so I'll just deal with him directly. I'm not paying 30 grand for this for a year's project." So they thought they were going to save themselves £30,000. They've spent over 50 grand in additional finance costs because the project has not been completed on time. That's without the amount they've overpaid the builder, without the fact that because they've not dealt with the project properly, they've now potentially got to pay that original contractor a load more money because they've not dealt with their application for payment properly. So a massive part of it we see is where people think that they're going to manage the project themselves, but they've not got the experience to understand how to actually interpret a contract and how to defend themselves when people are coming at them for extras, for variations, and how to challenge contractors effectively.
Yes, yeah, I mean, very good example. And again, you know, for our listeners overseas, an HMO is a house of multiple occupancy. So it's a house that is often split up into self-contained units, really, isn't it? That
Yeah.
is that how you would define
Yeah,
it?
it's the best way to describe it.
Yeah. So it's a kind of conversion project. So that's a massive kind of overrun. Give us some more examples, Richard.
So we are currently in negotiation on a new build project that is really seriously challenged, to say the least. It's 3 years late. They've only built a third of the scheme, but they've paid the builder for half of the project because the builder had front loaded all of their application and no one had looked at it. They thought they were being clever by only placing an order for a significant chunk of the project and then dangling the carrot of the rest of the project as an instruction later on, which is great. But now that's going to be revalued at today's rate. So instead of getting the job for 2020 prices, they're now going to be paying 2023 prices. Well, some of those materials have gone up 200-300%.
200 or 300%.
Yeah. So whereas if they'd have locked the price in, if they'd have been sensible at the beginning and had a proper tender process and said, right, we want a price for the whole scheme and locked that in, they would have saved themselves over £1 million.
Right, £1 million. So
We're
very,
over
very,
at 1.2 million.
yeah, so very, very significant sums of money. So beginning to see like a pattern here, which is all about how the project is set up in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's just go for one more example if you've got another one, and then we'll, yeah.
Yeah, so the other one is it's a terrace property in southwest London where it's 3 floors. So the property in question is the ground floor flat. So you've got a ground floor flat, a first floor flat, second floor flat. They're all owned by different people. The owner of the ground floor flat owns the freehold for the building. They've taken a 2-bedroom flat and converted that to a 5-bedroom HMO.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've been instructed by the owner of the second floor because when they've done the conversion of the ground floor flat, it's completely unlicensed. There's no license to artwork been submitted, even though in theory it would be between themselves. It would also mean that it's there so other people could rely on it. They've not looked at any of the load lines, so how the upper floors are supported by the lower floor. They've not looked at complying with building regulations. They've not complied with anything at all.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just extraordinary. Okay, so what's the consequence of that? Why were you brought in?
So we were brought in because the client got a water leak on the second floor, and water was coming through their ceiling, and which was ultimately coming through their roof because the roof's dropped 6 inches because the whole back of the building's moved.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, look, it's not funny. It's actually not a laughing matter. I
It's
mean, I'm laughing kind of out of incredulity, really, that anybody can actually approach things in that haphazard way.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe that the lack of care or diligence that people sort of demonstrate when you're talking about an asset that quite often, this is bricks and mortar in the UK. It's one of the most expensive places in the world to buy property. It's what makes
Yeah.
Britain so valuable is our real estate. But people seem to deal with it with it's just absolute laissez-faire attitude almost. Like they're just okay, well, just whatever. And when we met the builder on the ground floor and started to have a bit of a dialogue, there was a massive language barrier because the guys was some were from Bulgaria, some were from Romania. And when we were talking to them about how the drainage and stuff was being installed, all the drains were running uphill.
Uh-huh.
So not only is the back of the building dropped, but none of the drains are going to work. So when we sort of did some investigation into the soil stack, the stack was about 3.5 foot backed up with soil.
Ooh,
Can you
really?
imagine the pressure when that goes?
Oh, yeah. Gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But this is the problem because different parts of the world have different like we call it building regulations. In the States, they're called building codes. Interestingly, in America, you have to be licensed to be a contractor, which is
Mhm.
something that I massively advocate here. I've had several discussions with the CIOB about that already. We don't have that here, but one of the downsides to the economic migrancy and the transiency of labour around Europe is that we've got loads of people that have gone and bought a van in the UK and call themselves a builder and they're doing building work with no sort of even awareness that these standards even exist, let alone what they need to comply with. So they just do whatever they think, and at the end of the day, their attitude is if they put 2 bits of pipe together and it's waterproof, job done. Whether it falls away or not is irrelevant, or what it looks like, or what the lifespan of it is. They don't care because once the check's cleared or the money's gone, they've disappeared.
True, true. Yeah, as you said, there's a lot of transience, isn't there? So, okay. So, we've heard some examples of some public sector projects, private sector projects, huge projects, small projects, all of which have gone wrong, for various reasons. So let's now get on to talking about how to get it right then, Richard. So how can people not end up in these awful situations where they're, putting people at risk or losing huge amounts of money or, just having a really horrible, stressful time?
So it's actually remarkably simple. Make sure that you get your deal stacked properly. Make sure you've got a proper contingency. Make sure you've got the right. I hate this whole power team phrase. Make sure you've got the right professional people around you so that you've got the right advice and act on the advice that you're given. If you ask someone a question about how something's got to be designed, or, well, okay, we're going to take this wall out, and the engineer says, well, okay, well, you need that steel, you need this goalpost. They've given you that advice for a reason. Don't then say, well, my mate at Selco or Builder Depot says I can get that for a third of the price. You don't need a steel that big. Employ professionals to give you the design advice and to set the project up properly at the outset and follow a proper system. We teach the Reba system. It's an 8-step process for delivering projects properly.
Yeah.
It's got all of the steps in there for a reason. You
Yeah.
can't go. So many people get fixated on saving time at the beginning, but if you try and cut a week off of the front end of the program, it will cost you 4 weeks minimum when you get into construction because you won't have the drawings done properly. You won't be able to go and procure stuff properly. You won't have a program done that actually is something more than just coloured boxes on a piece of paper. It actually sort of demonstrates the relationships and the relationships between the trade and the tasks. All
Yes.
of which means that you can get the job set up and run properly by a proper project manager. And if that isn't what you do as a job, then either go and learn how to do that, or go and pay somebody to either give you some sort of support part-time where they teach you to do it, or employ a full-time professional project manager to do it and put that cost into your deal, because you can still make really good money out of the deal, and you'll do it, and you might even actually find that you enjoy doing it because it's less stressful.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes our egos get in the way, don't they? You know,
Massively.
yes, because we all like to think that we can do this. You know, that's what we tell ourselves. We can do this. We can, we can make it happen. And to a certain extent, it's kind of wishful thinking. But sometimes we just have to know that there are things that we don't know, and we have to be aware that we do have not just gaps in our skill sets and our knowledge and so on, but we also have blind spots, and we can't realize what those are if we don't have the experience. So it makes a lot of sense, really. Just get the right advice.
Yeah, I
Get
mean,
the
Donald
right.
Rumsfeld's famous for it, unknown unknowns. People don't know what they don't know. And the one thing that most people, 99.9% of people that we've polled in audiences at public speaking events, don't know that in the construction industry, you're guilty until you're proven innocent. So if there's an accident on your site, you are presumed to be guilty as the client or as
Yes.
the main contractor. And if you don't have the paperwork and the systems in place to demonstrate your innocence, you'll be found guilty. And the HSE's prosecution success rate is over 87%,
Yes.
with an average fine of £87,000.
Yes. And unfortunately, people do die. They do die. It does happen.
Over
Everybody knows.
70 deaths last year, unfortunately.
Yes, exactly. So, it is a very, very serious issue for sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, Richard, tell us a bit about your program then. When people come to you, and also you're a non-exec director. So, what is it that you do first of all in your program, and then what do you do as a non-exec?
Okay. So the program that we've written is essentially like my complete career, every bit of knowledge that I've learned, the lessons that we've learned, how we've learned them, and how we've built that into an 8-step system to successfully deliver projects. So it's right from strategic definition at the beginning. Is there even a project? What is the best and highest use for this asset? That might be that it's not a project. We might just get the planning going on it and we might flip it. Might be a bit of land. We might rent it out for containers. It doesn't always have to end in a building project. So it goes literally right from step 0 right through to stage 7, which is actually putting the building into use. So it goes right through finding the deal, how to fund the deal, how to get the deal designed to get the best and highest use, how to then procure it safely and get the best value from proper, good quality trades that are going to deliver the site properly, how to comply with all the health and safety regulations and all the law around it, how to protect yourself as the client and as the investor, and how to protect the investor's funds at all times, how to then get the project finished, how to get the paperwork and the warranties in place, and then ultimately how to get the project dressed, staged, finished and sold. So that's the training course that we've written.
Well, I mean, that's amazing, because that's a soup to nuts, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we've had feedback from people that are complete newbies. So after I wrote it, I went out to the industry and I spoke to 3 big high-level industry sages and asked for their feedback on the content once we've got the first draft done, which we took into draft 2. And I also then spoke to people at higher education establishments to verify the educational content of it, which was really good. And we got some good feedback that went into the final version. And the feedback we've had from people in the room, both newbies and people that have been in the industry for decades, has been, let's just say, it rewarded me from a soul point of view for the investment it made of my time, which has been the best part of a year's work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's really, really fantastic. And the thing is, that there are some bad guys that work in property. There are some people who just don't care. There's the whole kind of gamut. But I know, obviously, Richard, that you are not just one of the good guys, but one of the guys that really understands property in a very deep way. So I'm sure that your program is absolutely fantastic. So let's talk about the non-exec stuff. What are you doing there as well?
So, okay, so that's completely different. So in some ways it's different, in some ways it's the same. It's the same in that it's my way of leveraging my knowledge. So I got diagnosed with an illness called ulcerative colitis a number of years ago, and I don't know how long I'm going to be out and about and mobile. And one of my mentors said to me, it would be a crime if you didn't share your knowledge. And there's loads of other construction businesses that would get value from that, but can't afford to have someone full time. So I've got a number of non-exec directorships where I offer the critical person, the person that will come in and ask those difficult searching questions, but sometimes of individuals within the business, always of the business, but always from the point of view of with the business and the people's best interest at heart. So they're all different. Some of them it's literally a day a month. Others is completely like one of my clients. I'm a non-exec, but I'm also coaching the MD, and she's got 24-hour access to me via WhatsApp or Voxer. So they're all different, but it's all based around leveraging my knowledge to help other people shortcut their success in their construction businesses. So it's specific to businesses that are service providers in construction, because that's where my strengths are. I don't really want to go outside of the construction industry or the property industry, because that's where I can add the most value. And yeah, it's so really the feedback's been really, really positive from people that we're providing that service to. So it's something I'm going to look to do more of going forward.
Amazing. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Richard. It's just been fantastic to have you here on the podcast. And tell us, how would people get hold of you if they wanted to take it further?
So I'm on most of the social media platforms. I'm even on TikTok, much to my daughter's annoyance. So yeah, I'm just Richard Stone on LinkedIn. I'm RM Stone 2011, I think, on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on most of the social media platforms. Just drop me a DM and we'll just arrange a call if somebody's got an issue they want to sort of have a chat around or some advice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Richard, and thank you. We've had lots of comments here. So, whoa, what an expensive learning curve was one of them. So yeah, thank you very much to all the audience that joined us here live tonight as well, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
No problem. Thank you. Great to see you again, Jane.